Hello, I'm Colin Blanchard and I'm going to talk about a few aspects, well, one aspect specifically of printmaking, Linocut. In this instance, using this rather marvellous little machine, which is the XCut XPress. It was originally made and sold as a embossing and die cutting machine. But increasing numbers of printmakers around the world have discovered that it's actually quite an efficient tabletop press. I've nicknamed it the handbag press because it's very, very handy. There are a number of different types of these little presses around, but this is the one which a lot of us prefer because not only is it handy, extremely portable, but it has this all-important pressure adjustment dial which enables you to slightly change the gap between the two rollers. When it arrives, it simply opens like this. The lock slides across and the bed clips in place. And we're pretty much ready for action. It does come with its own bed suitable for printmaking, but this is a little short at A4, also a little bit loose. So a lot of people have been making their own longer beds. I made two from a large commercial chopping board. This is about a centimetre thick polypropylene, keeps clean and flat. But I've also made successfully longer bed from 9mm MDF with a little varnish on. This one you can see has been working quite successfully with a conventional registration system and a single block lino and screen print combination to make little greetings cards. You also need some sort of a blanket to print lino and intaglio prints on here. People have printed etchings, collagraphs and so on very successfully on the XCut. You can use ordinary scraps of craft felt, or you can acquire something smooth like this. It's about all you need, that sort of thickness of felt for a printing blanket. So what we're going to print, what I'm going to do is to show you how I set up and print a multi-block Linocut or a reduction Linocut on the XCut XPress. I'm going to show you how I do it. There are lots of different ways. People use different methods to me and get perfectly good results, so I want to stress that straight away. What I'm going to print, and I'm going to try and set up and proof, is a block which I've carved here. Started it off, as always with my prints, I'm not absolutely sure where I'm going with it. I decided I needed it slightly bigger, so you can see that I've mounted the lino onto a backing board so that I can have a second and maybe even a third block the same size. I use marmoleum flooring lino, which is got a bit of a texture and a little bit of a shine to it, which I sand flat and glue to some sort of a backing board. In my larger presses I'll tend to use 6mm MDF with the lino glued to it. For the XCut I tend to use a thinner board, just ordinary hardboard masonite, and I use carpet spray glue to adhere the lino to the surface. As you can see, the lino is, I buy the palest colour I can get, and I stain the surface with some acrylic ink before I start work so that when I'm carving I use field tools. When I'm carving, I can actually see where I'm carving. Okay, so it's quite feasible to just take a lino block, pop it onto the bed, just an ordinary piece of lino or one glued to a board like that, pop your paper on the top and run it through the press. The problem with that, of course, is that there's no consistency for register. You also potentially have the problem of the rollers hitting the lino and moving the block slightly, or the paper shifting slightly on the surface, giving you a smudgy result. So I'm going to use, as I always do, a form, F-O-R-M-E, as it's known in conventional letterpress printing, to hold the block in position. Not only does it hold the block in position, but it also, as you can see from this, it also enables the printing part of the lino, I don't know if you can just see that, to protrude slightly above the form itself. This gives us another advantage as well. It means that we can attach some sort of registration system to the outside part of the form, and it also means that as the blanket goes through the pressure of the rollers, the pressure first is on the blanket, then on the form, then on the paper and the form, and then only then onto the raised part of the block, so that the inked up block is not hitting the rollers as it goes through. It also gives us room to have a registration system, as I say. You can use ordinary tabs, conventional tabs, glued, taped rather, down to the board, to the form itself. What I'm going to set up to use here are these things, which are known as Turns-Burton registration tabs and pins. They were, and still are, sold to register overlaying acetates for animation films, but printmakers, lino cutters all around the world are now using these to enable us to attach tabs to the paper, and then each sheet of paper can click in position to the tabs. So having this form means that we can attach the tabs to the form, and therefore the paper goes into exact register every time. I'll come on to that again in a minute. So I'm going to square the whole thing up, pretty much in the centre in this case, and I'm going to simply attach these pieces of, I should have said, these pieces that make up the form are the same material that I've used to support the lino itself. That means that the lino simply protrudes above the surface of the form. So I'm going to use ordinary masking tape, which on this polypropylene works perfectly adequately to make up our form. So I'll be back in a minute when I've done that. Okay, so as you can see now, I've taped the form firmly, just using conventional masking tape, to the bed in such a way that the block or blocks will fit exactly, and I mean exactly, into the hole. This is why I've got this little finger hole here, so that I can get them out again, because they really do need to be that tight for good register. That means that the second block, or any amount of blocks, as long as they're exactly the same size, should fit exactly into that hole, and they cannot move at all. That means that given that the paper goes down in exactly the same place every time, the registration should be spot on. There are other things that can happen, atmospheric change on the paper, all sorts of things that can go wrong, but hopefully nothing will. Word on paper, I'm using Somerset 300 gram satin, which is my preferred printmaking paper for just about everything. Use whatever you like, but the point I want to make is that when you're setting up and proofing, you really do need to use the same paper, and use good paper as well. It's no point in cutting corners with cheap paper, but you do need to use the same paper and the same inks that you're going to use for the actual edition itself when you're doing the setup. There's absolutely no point in getting a good print on cheap cartridge paper and then finding that it won't work on your printing paper. So the other thing that I've done is I've marked on the form the position where the paper will need to be approximately, well, a little bit more than approximately, to allow the image to print in the position on the paper that I wanted. And I've also marked the position of the Turns-Burton pins. These, by the way, are the 0.55, the lowest ones that I can get hold of. They come in various heights, these pins, but obviously you don't want a big lump of metal going through your press, so the 0.55 ones are quite adequate for this purpose. Okay, so now having fixed the position of the block in the form, having decided where in relation to the image I want the paper to be, we have the laborious part of this process. These Turns-Burton pins are really excellent at getting good register, but the slightly laborious part of them now is I have to attach the pins to the form and then tabs to every single sheet of paper that I'm going to print in the edition, plus a few spares. Now, a lot of people just use 2 pins on the short edge. Some people use 2 pins on the long edge. I've found with these Turns-Burton pins on the XCut in particular, on the long bed of the XCut, that a 3rd pin is very useful. Prints like this, which was a reduction Linocut done on the XCut, done entirely on the XCut with some screen printed background colour, enabled me having 3 pins, 2 at one short edge, 1 at the other short edge at the far end. Stops the press twisting the paper slightly and giving me a misregister from one end to the other. So with a reduction print like this, fine detail reduction print, it's quite important obviously that the register is spot on from one whisker at that end to the hair on his tail at the other. So I use 3. 2 would probably be okay for this image, but I'm going to show you how I set up using 3 pins. So I'm going to use conventional masking tape to fix the position of the pins to the form. One, 2, and then a 3rd one at this end. So I'm using ordinary masking tape, as I say, which is nice and strong, so that the pins can't move. Block can't move, form can't move, pins can't move. I then take each sheet of paper in my pile, in my planned edition, as I say, plus spares, remembering of course that we're going to be printing on the good side, which is this side. I've marked where I want it on the form, lay that in position, and then we take a tab for each of the pins. In this case, I'm going to use this slightly lower tack yellow masking tape to attach the tabs to the back of the paper. If you're worried about the paper tearing when the tabs are removed at the end of the print run, there are two ways around that. One is to make the paper big enough to enable you to trim the ends off, or you can warm the tape slightly with a conventional iron and they should peel away fairly cleanly. Okay, so I'm going to carry on now and tab up all of the sheets of paper, and then in the next video we'll have a go at setting the pressure of the press and actually getting some ink on some paper.